Imagine picking up like a 700-year-old fantasy book.
Right.
You dust off the cover, you crack open these brittle pages, and you're fully expecting to find dragons, mythical beasts.
Maybe some knights in shining armor.
Exactly. All the standard medieval tropes you would expect from that era. But instead, as you start reading the poetic verses, you suddenly realize you are looking at a perfectly accurate textbook description of modern astrophysics and geology.
It completely shatters your baseline expectations of what the human mind was capable of conceptualizing back then.
Oh, totally.
You sit down to read a piece of religious allegory, but your brain is actually processing complex mechanical physics.
It's a total mind-bending premise, and it is exactly what we're jumping into for today's deep dive. We are looking at this fascinating article published on May 21st, 2026 by technoscience.net.
Yeah, it covers a really groundbreaking presentation from the European Geosciences Union General Assembly over in Vienna.
Right. And our mission today is to explore how a 14th century poet accidentally predicted the precise physical mechanics of catastrophic meteorite impacts.
Because the underlying theme here, it challenges a lot of our assumptions about the linear progression of human knowledge. We tend to think of scientific discovery as this strict chronological ladder, right? But this research suggests that human intuition can sometimes leapfrog the scientific method by, well, hundreds of years.
It's wild. But before we get into the heavy science, I have to mention a bizarre little quirk from the source material today.
Oh, the ad.
Yes. Right in the middle of this dense scientific analysis about medieval poetry, there was a completely surreal web ad for an Exilo Bono Duo wafer candy bar.
It was such a jarring juxtaposition.
I know. And the text literally asked, "Do you speak T9 Armish?"
Which is just, what does that even mean?
I have absolutely no idea. I stared at it thinking, I don't know what T9 Armish is. But it actually perfectly represents what we are doing today.
How so?
Well, we might not speak T9 Armish, but our mission today is essentially a massive translation job.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Right. We are translating the archaic, allegorical language of medieval poetry into the precise, data-driven language of modern geological science. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, and to do that translation effectively, we really have to understand the specific methodology at play here. We're looking at the work of Professor Timothy Burberry from Marshall University.
Right.
And his field of study is known as geomythology.
Geomythology. I mean, the word itself sounds like an oxymoron.
It really does.
It pairs the hardest, most tangible earth science with, pure fairy tales.
It sounds contradictory, but it's actually a highly respected, rigorous discipline. Geomythologists operate on the premise that ancient myths and legends aren't always just pure imagination born out of nowhere.
Right, there's a kernel of truth.
Exactly. Often they contain these hidden, encoded traces of actual real-world geological events. Ancient peoples witnessed massive natural phenomena, but they simply lack the scientific vocabulary to document them objectively.
So if an ancient culture witnesses a massive volcanic eruption, but they don't have the concepts of magma chambers or, tectonic plate friction.
Right, they wouldn't use those words.
They might describe an angry god breathing fire from a mountaintop.
Precisely.
The narrative wrapper is a myth, but the core event it describes is a historical geological fact.
And the job of the geomythologist is to basically strip away that narrative wrapper. But they don't just look for vague similarities.
What do you mean?
Well, they aren't saying, oh, this myth has a fire, maybe it was a volcano. They're searching for what we call a strict physical logic operating beneath the fantastical elements.
Okay, physical logic.
Yeah, they're looking for specific sequential physical reactions that align perfectly with the laws of thermodynamics, fluid dynamics, and gravity.
But how does a researcher like Professor Burberry actually apply that in practice? If you are reading an ancient text, how do you even begin to separate a metaphorical demon from a literal rock?
You test the text against the unbreakable laws of physics. Let's take thermodynamics as an example.
Okay.
Heat transfer, energy conservation. If a myth describes an event that magically violates those laws, say a mountain erupts but the surrounding snow doesn't melt and no energy is transferred, the geomythologist leaves it in the realm of fiction.
That makes sense.
But if a myth describes a fantastical beast emerging from the earth, and the text specifically details the surrounding water instantly vaporizing into steam, the earth fracturing under immense pressure, and the local temperature skyrocketing,
then the myth is, inexplicably following the exact mechanical rules of geothermal venting or a magmatic intrusion.
yes,
The math works even if the characters don't.
That is exactly when the alarm bells start ringing for a researcher. You found a sequence of events tethered to strict physical logic. And that specific search for physical logic brings us directly to the main subject of Burberry's presentation in Vienna,
Dante Alighieri's epic poem, the Inferno.
which was written between 1308 and 1321.
Right. And most of you listening probably know the basic premise, maybe from a high school English class. Dante gets lost in a dark wood and gets taken on a guided tour descending through the different terrifying levels of hell.
But Professor Burberry isn't analyzing the Inferno for its theology or its moral philosophy.
No, he's looking at the structure.
Right, he is analyzing the specific mythological origin story Dante creates for the physical structure of hell. He is looking at Dante's description of the fall of Lucifer from heaven down to earth.
Because in Dante's narrative, Lucifer rebels against God, gets physically cast out of the heavens, falls through space, and slams directly into the planet. And traditionally, scholars read that as pure religious allegory representing the fall from grace. But Burberry argues that if you strip away the angel wings and look at the physical logic Dante applies to this event, it is actually the first written description of a massive, catastrophic meteorite impact.
It really is. The physical logic is undeniable when you look at the mechanics Dante wrote down.
Yeah.
He doesn't describe Lucifer magically teleporting underground.
Right, there's no magic poof.
Exactly. He describes a physical object of incomprehensible mass and density, traveling at an immense velocity through the atmosphere and physically piercing the Earth's solid crust.
Let's talk about the thermodynamics of that atmospheric entry, because our source details exactly how Dante wrote about this.
Yeah, this part is wild.
When a massive body, like a meteorite, or in this case Lucifer, enters the atmosphere, it isn't just about gravity pulling it down. The friction creates immense thermal energy. And Dante actually describes the very Earth fleeing from Lucifer in terror as he approaches.
And that fleeing is an allegorical description of atmospheric displacement and aerodynamic heating. A meteor compressing the air in front of it creates a shock wave so hot it can literally vaporize the surface of the Earth before the rock even makes physical contact.
And Dante intuited that.
He intuits this destructive entry path. But where his intuition becomes genuinely astounding is what happens after the impact.
This is the part that completely rewired how I view medieval literature.
Oh, same here.
When Lucifer hits the Earth, the sheer force of the impact has to displace a massive amount of rock and soil.
Right, that matter has to go somewhere.
Exactly. Dante writes that this displaced terrestrial matter is violently pushed upward, erupting out of the Earth on the opposite side to form a massive, towering mountain, which he calls Purgatory. Meanwhile, the actual impact zone, the cavity left behind by the strike, forms the descending concentric circles of hell.
What's fascinating here is how the mythological architecture maps perfectly onto the conservation of mass. If you punch a massive hole into a solid sphere, that material cannot just disappear. The kinetic energy of the impact has to transfer into the surrounding rock, pushing it outward and upward.
So Dante envisioned a mechanical transfer of energy and matter that is astonishingly accurate to how hypervelocity impact craters are actually formed.
He absolutely did.
And to really help you visualize the structural accuracy of this, we need to bring in a visual aid that was mentioned in the source material.
The Botticelli painting.
Yes. In the late 15th century, Sandro Botticelli painted a famous piece called The Map of Hell, which was specifically designed to illustrate Dante's Inferno.
And he meticulously took Dante's written descriptions and basically drafted them out like an architectural blueprint.
Botticelli's painting is just a masterpiece of conceptual cartography. He illustrates hell as this massive funnel-shaped cavity plunging into the earth. But the critical detail is the texture of the cavity walls.
They are not smooth slopes.
No. Botticelli paints hell as a series of descending, terraced rings, getting smaller and smaller as they plunge toward the center.
And if you look at that painting, observing those terraced rings, you are looking at the exact structural profile of a multi-ring impact crater.
It's unbelievable.
It is, because the fluid dynamics of a solid rock impact at hypervelocity are incredibly counterintuitive, which is why Dante predicting it is so wild.
Right.
When a meteorite of sufficient size hits a planetary body, the shockwave is so intense that the solid bedrock momentarily behaves almost like a liquid.
Imagine dropping a heavy steel marble into a deep bowl of flour.
That's a great way to picture it.
When the marble hits, it pushes the flour violently outward into a ring, but the center of the impact zone immediately bounces back up into a little peak.
Exactly, while the outer walls collapse inward into terraces.
So that is the exact mechanism. The rock compresses, then rebounds, creating a central peak, while the unstable edges of the crater collapse inward on themselves, forming those stepped concentric rings.
Dante essentially looked at Lucifer as the steel marble and the earth as the flower. He described this exact multi-ring structure, terraced walls and all, in the early 1300s, and then Botticelli drafted it in the 1400s. It looks exactly like the massive, complex craters we map on the moon today using modern telescopes.
But Dante didn't stop at just describing a localized hole in the ground.
No, he went much bigger.
The physical logic he applied extended to a global scale. Professor Burberry's analysis points out that the Inferno also contains a highly specific detail regarding the state of the entire planet before Lucifer's fall.
Yeah, Dante wrote that originally the Earth's southern hemisphere was completely covered by a massive supercontinent.
Okay.
There was no ocean there, it was all dry land. But when Lucifer hit the Earth, the sheer unimaginable force of that impact caused those southern landmasses to violently displace.
The poem states they rapidly shifted from the south up to the north, leaving behind a massive empty basin in the southern hemisphere that subsequently filled with water to become an ocean.
Right.
Now, hold on. I hear the logic of displacing dirt to make a crater. The marble in the flower bowl makes total sense. But moving whole continental landmasses, causing entire oceans to physically shift hemispheres. I'm struggling to buy that Dante wasn't just abandoning physics there and leaning into pure dramatic flair.
The skepticism makes sense because the scale of energy required to shift a continental plate is almost beyond human comprehension.
It feels like mythological exaggeration.
It does. But Burberry brings in a striking scientific comparison to validate Dante's scale here.
What's the comparison?
He points out that this kind of massive geological restructuring is precisely the global consequence you see in extinction-level impact events.
Oh, wow. Like the dinosaurs.
Exactly. Burberry actually compares Dante's scenario to the asteroid impact that wiped out the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. The one that created the Chicxulub crater down in modern-day Mexico.
Let's look at the actual physics of the Chicxulub impact then.
Okay, so that event didn't just leave a localized hole in the ground. The kinetic energy released was equivalent to billions of atomic bombs detonating simultaneously.
Billions.
Yes. That kind of energy doesn't just stop at the crust. It sends seismic waves rippling deep through the Earth's mantle.
It fundamentally destabilizes the planet's architecture.
Exactly. It causes massive tectonic disturbances, it triggers global tsunamis that permanently reshape coastlines, and it can even trigger antipodal volcanism.
Meaning the impact on one side of the planet sends shockwaves that cause volcanic eruptions on the exact opposite side of the globe.
Right, so while a single impact might not smoothly slide a continent from the South Pole to the North Pole overnight, like a puck on an ice rink,
Yeah, that would be a stretch.
the concept that a cosmic impact of that magnitude would fundamentally restructure the Earth's land masses, displace oceans, and completely alter the globe's geography, that is completely sound geological science.
Dante understood that an object massive enough to pierce the Earth's crust would have apocalyptic, planet-altering consequences. He scaled up the mechanics perfectly.
He really did.
But if the Inferno outlines the mechanics of multi-ring craters and global tectonic shifts triggered by kinetic energy, how on earth could Dante Alighieri possibly have known this?
It's the big question.
He was writing in 1300s Florence. He didn't have a telescope, let alone a seismograph.
Right, and to fully appreciate the magnitude of this historical paradox, we really have to immerse ourselves in the scientific reality of the 14th century.
Okay, set the scene for us.
We have to understand Aristotelian cosmology, which was the absolute unquestioned scientific paradigm of Dante's era.
They weren't exactly tracking near-Earth asteroids back then.
They didn't even believe space existed as we understand it. Under Aristotelian cosmology, the universe was believed to be a series of perfect, transparent, crystalline spheres nesting inside each other, revolving around a stationary Earth.
The sphere of the moon, the sphere of Mercury, Venus, and so on.
Right.
And a core tenet of that belief system was that those heavens were totally immutable. They were perfect, permanent, and divine. Earth was the center of decay and change, but the sky above was completely flawless.
So the very concept of space debris, of random chaotic rocks floating around in the heavens, was not just unknown. It was philosophically absurd and, frankly, bordering on heretical.
Wow.
If something fell, it belonged to the earth. The heavens did not drop debris. The sky was literally a ceiling of perfection.
And the source gives a stark timeline to emphasize this. Meteorites wouldn't be recognized by the mainstream scientific community as having an extraterrestrial origin until the 19th century.
Think about the weight of that timeline for a second. For 500 years after Dante wrote the Inferno, if a farmer witnessed a meteorite strike a field, dug up the smoking rock, and brought it to the most prestigious university in Europe.
The scientists would tell him he was hallucinating.
Exactly. They would argue the rock was swept up by a freak windstorm or ejected from a distant volcano. The scientific consensus fundamentally rejected the idea that rocks could fall from space until the early 1800s.
So what does this all mean? We have a poet in the 1300s describing the thermodynamic and tectonic mechanics of a space rock hitting the Earth half a millennium before science even believed space rocks existed.
It's crazy.
Was Dante secretly consulting with time travelers?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer is far more grounded, but arguably more profound.
Okay, what is it?
Dante wasn't a scientist, and he wasn't trying to write a geology textbook. What we are seeing in the Inferno is an act of pure, relentless human intuition.
This raw intuition.
Yeah. Dante possessed a mind so deeply attuned to the laws of cause and effect that he managed to conceptualize the physical reality of a cosmic collision centuries before the scientific method caught up.
He essentially ran a physics simulation in his own imagination.
Precisely.
He took a single unbreakable logical constraint: if an object this incomprehensibly heavy hits an object, the solid matter must be conserved and energy must transfer. And he followed that physical constraint to its absolute apocalyptic conclusion.
Dante wasn't doing magic. He was applying rigorous physical logic to a mythological premise. He understood kinetic energy. He understood that actions have equal and opposite reactions, long before Isaac Newton formally articulated those laws.
Wow.
Because he was operating in the realm of poetry, he wasn't constrained by the rigid scientific dogma of Aristotelian cosmology. Poetry gave his mind the freedom to explore physics that academic science was totally blind to.
You know, in our modern era, we are constantly surrounded by information overload. You have access to endless data, satellite imagery, supercomputers modeling every variable of the natural world.
Yeah, we rely on it completely.
It is so easy to start believing that truth can only be found in a spreadsheet or a verified data set. But there is something deeply inspiring about this deep dive. It shows us that imagination, when tethered tightly to strict physical logic, becomes a form of accidental science.
It is a testament to the power of logical extrapolation. Dante looked at the physical world around him, understood how solid objects interacted on a small scale, and just had the intellectual courage to scale those observations up to a planetary level.
So to summarize the incredible journey we've been on today, we started with an article covering a geosciences conference in Vienna, and we learned how Professor Timothy Burberry used the strict physical metrics of geomythology to decode a 14th century poem.
Right.
We explored how Dante Alighieri accidentally mapped out the complex fluid dynamics of multi-ring impact craters, complete with the upward displacement of rock, just by imagining the realistic thermodynamics of a falling angel.
It's incredible.
And we unpacked how he predicted the massive tectonic shifts associated with extinction-level events 5 centuries before the world even accepted that rocks could fall from the sky.
It entirely changes how you approach classical literature.
Yeah.
And it leaves us with a highly provocative question to consider regarding our own modern understanding of history.
Which is, if a medieval poet like Dante could conceptualize these advanced geological realities centuries before science had the tools to prove them, what other hidden scientific truths might be sitting on our bookshelves right now?
Really makes you wonder.
If you look at the ancient artistic masterpieces or the established myths of cultures around the world, what other literal mechanical truths are buried inside those metaphors, just waiting for a modern reader to decode them?
Exactly.
Remember that 700-year-old fantasy book we talked about at the beginning? The next time you open a classic, you might just be reading the future of science. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep reading, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.